All right. You know that feeling, don't you? That mix of excitement and maybe a little bit of dread when you're gearing up for a big exam, especially one like the Singapore real estate salesperson or RES exam. I mean, the sheer amount of stuff, property taxes, land use rules, you can feel like, well, like drinking from a fire hose sometimes. Well, don't worry, because welcome to Ace Your RES Exam Key Topic Deep Dive Series. This is your shortcut, really, to getting a grip on those tricky concepts. Today, we're diving deep, cutting through the jargon on two things that honestly often trip people up: buyer stamp duty, BSD, and temporary occupation licenses, or TOLs.
Yeah, and our mission today is pretty clear. We want to unpack these concepts properly, understand the nuances, the differences, because knowing these distinctions won't just help you pass the RES exam, though that's key. It'll give you real practical knowledge for your actual career. And we're sticking to the official sources here, IRS, SLA, so you know you're getting the street scoop, the accurate stuff.
Okay, excellent. So let's kick off with buyer stamp duty, BSD.
Hmm.
What is it,
Hmm.
fundamentally?
Mm-hmm.
At its heart, it's a tax, right, on the documents you sign when you buy or acquire property here in Singapore. Super fundamental.
Exactly. It's fundamental. But what's interesting and where people sometimes get caught out is that it's not just about handing over cash for a house. BSD applies to a whole range of documents linked to acquisitions. Yes, the obvious ones like accepting an option to purchase or signing the sale and purchase agreement, but it also covers things like getting property as a gift or certain kinds of declarations of trust, specifically when the beneficial interest, the real underlying ownership, changes hands. Even things like distributions when a company winds up, or, and this is quite specific, someone giving up their interest in a residential property held under a bare trust. That's Section 22C stuff.
Okay, hang on. That Section 22C thing, the bare trust, that sounds pretty technical. So are we talking about situations where, like, someone legally owns the property on paper, but they're just holding it for someone else behind the scenes? And if that someone else gives up their claim, even if it doesn't look like a normal sale, tax is due because the real economic benefit shifted. Is that the idea?
Precisely, you've nailed it. And that difference between, say, a fixed $10 duty for a declaration of trust where nothing really changes in terms of who benefits versus the full ad valorem duty when that beneficial interest does change, well, that's a crucial distinction. It shows BSD isn't just about the obvious sale. It's about taxing the transfer of that economic ownership, that real benefit, even if the paperwork looks different. It's about fairness and preventing loopholes, really.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Now, how do they actually calculate it? I heard something about purchase price versus market value. This is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? BSD is computed on the higher of the purchase price written in the document, or the market value. Why do they do that?
The higher of rule, yes. That's basically an anti-avoidance measure. It stops people from just writing down a really low price in the agreement to try and pay less duty. So if you agree to buy for $1 million, but, an independent valuation says it's actually worth $1.2 million, well, you're paying BSD based on that $1.2 million. Keeps things fair. And speaking of price, let's talk discounts. Cash discounts might be deductible for stamp duty, but only if they're spelled out clearly in the document and the final price still reflects the actual market value. But, and this is a big but, watch out for non-cash goodies like furniture vouchers, maybe a car thrown in, rental guarantees, those things, or any benefits not actually stated in the price. They're not deductible. They're still part of the deal's value. IRES looks at the whole picture. And remember, it's that first document you execute, usually the option to purchase, that bears the full stamp duty.
That's a really important detail, that first document rule. Okay, stepping back a bit, what about huge deals, like an en bloc sale or buying a whole block of units together? How does BSD work there?
Good question. For those big collective acquisitions, like en bloc, stamp duty is calculated on the total purchase price for the whole lot. Even if you have multiple individual sale documents flying around, if those purchases are all linked, conditional on each other, it's treated as one big transaction for duty purposes. So only one of those linked documents needs the full ad valorem stamp based on that total price. It simplifies things, but makes sure the full value gets taxed appropriately.
And the rates themselves, they haven't stayed the same, have they? I seem to remember changes.
Oh, absolutely. The rates have definitely evolved over time, reflecting different policy goals. Before February 2018, the top BSD rate was 3%. Then from Feb 2018 up to Feb 2023, it went up to 4% for residential properties. And since February 15th, 2023, there's been another change. The top marginal rate for residential is now 6%, and for non-residential, it's 5%.
Right. Could you maybe walk us through that tiered structure? Like, how did the percentages apply? An example might help make it clearer.
Sure. It's tiered, meaning different slices of the value get taxed at different rates. For both residential and non-residential, under the latest rates, it works like this. The first $180,000 of the value is taxed at 1%. The next $180,000 is at 2%. The slice after that, up to $1 million total, is at 3%. For residential, it keeps going up. Amounts between $1 and 1.5 meters are at 4%, then 1.5 meters to $3 at 5%, and anything above $3 hits that top 6% marginal rate. For non-residential, it climbs similarly, but maxes out at 5% for value above $1.5 million. And the final calculated duty is always rounded down to the nearest dollar. Minimum $1, though. Think about a mixed-use property, say land zone commercial and residential. These can be a bit tricky. If there's no specific breakdown, IRS often assumes, by default, that 60% of the gross floor area GFA is residential and 40% is non-residential for the BSD calculation. Unless, of course, you get a professional valuation that gets a different split. So if it's valued at $2 million, 1.2 meters gets the residential rates applied, $800 gets the non-residential rates. You've got to split it.
That's a great example. Clarifies it perfectly. Now, a question I bet many listeners have, especially those prepping for the RES exam. Who actually pays BSD? Does it matter if you're Singaporean or if it's your first property?
Yeah, that's a common one. And the answer is pretty straightforward. Basically, everyone who buys or acquires property in Singapore citizens buying their very first home, yes, they pay BSD. HDB flat buyers, yes, they pay BSD. It doesn't matter about your nationality or how many properties you own. BSD applies across the board. Another really important nuance. It's the property's official zoning that usually dictates the BSD rate, not what it's temporarily being used for. So if you buy land-zoned residential, but right now there's, say, a temporary childcare center on it, you still pay the residential BSD rates because that's the underlying zoning. Now, there are exceptions, like if the upper floor of a shop house has explicit long-term planning permission, maybe over 10 years for restaurant use, then that part could potentially attract non-residential rates. It depends on the approved use and zoning.
Okay, good point to remember for the exam. Zoning over temporary use. Now, on a maybe a slightly more serious note, what if someone tries to, play games with the dates to avoid higher duty? Does the IRS care about that?
Oh, absolutely. This is really important. Trying to change or backdate the date on an instrument, like an option to purchase, specifically to avoid paying higher duty after a rate increase, that is a very serious offense under the Stamp Duties Act. We're talking potentially hefty fines or even imprisonment. IRS takes tax evasion and avoidance extremely seriously. Don't even think about it. And while we're clarifying things, let's quickly touch on ABSD, additional buyer's stamp duty. It's easy to confuse them. ABSD is totally separate from BSD. It's an additional tax paid on top of BSD by certain groups like foreigners buying any residential property or Singaporeans buying their second, third, etc. residential property. It's more of a cooling measure, really. BSD is the baseline tax for everyone. And just briefly, yes, there are some specific remissions for BSD, like if you buy residential land but commit to developing it entirely for non-residential purposes, but the conditions are very, very strict.
Wow, okay. DSD is definitely more complex than it looks on the surface. Right, let's switch gears completely now. We've done the tax deep dive. Now let's look at temporary land use. Let's talk about the temporary occupation license, or TOL. This is what you need for short-term access to state land, sort of like borrowing a book from the library, but it's a piece of land instead. Allows people or companies to use state land for a limited time for a specific thing.
Exactly. And the absolute defining characteristic of a TOL is that it's temporary. Always for a limited period, could be days, could be months, maybe a few years. And renewal isn't guaranteed. It's totally at the discretion of whoever issued it. Crucially, and this is a major legal point for your exam, a TOL does not create a landlord-tenant relationship. The holder is just a licensee. You get permission, but no ownership rights, no proprietary interest, no exclusive possession like a tenant gets. It's also non-transferable. You can't sell your TOL to someone else. It's granted for a very specific use. And if you use it for something else, they can revoke it, often with pretty short notice.
Okay, so if it's permission from the state, who actually issues these TOLs? Is it just one agency?
No, generally you're looking at three main players. The Singapore Land Authority, SLA, they're the main custodian for most types of vacant state land, lots of different uses. Then there's Jurong Town Corporation, JTC. They handle TOLs specifically for industrial land. Makes sense. And finally, the Housing and Development Board, HDB. They issue TOLs for land within HDB estates, often for things that serve the community, like maybe a temporary market or some local commercial activity.
Right, different authorities for different types of land. So where would we actually see TOLs in action? What are the common uses our listeners might encounter?
Oh, they're incredibly versatile, and you see them everywhere once you start looking. Construction sites are a huge one for site offices, storing materials, maybe temporary worker dorms. Also, for events, think fairs, carnivals, religious festivals, maybe temporary parking for an event. Commercially, you see them for things like show flats built on land that's not yet developed, or maybe pop up shops, food kiosks,
Hmm.
and even community uses like community gardens on vacant plots, or sometimes short term farming. They really allow for flexible use of land that's waiting for development.
And you mentioned HDB earlier. They seem to have different types, like renewable versus non-renewable. What's the difference there?
Yeah, HDB makes that distinction, which is quite practical. Renewable TOLs are usually for slightly longer term interim uses. The land might be vacant for a while, so they allow a more ongoing temporary use subject to renewal. Non renewable TOLs, or NRTOLs, are strictly for short term one off things, like that weekend trade fair or specific festival for a fixed number of days. Once the time's up, it's done. No renewal expected. It allows for quick, temporary activations of space.
Okay, so you get this license, this permission.
Mhm.
What are the strings attached? What can't you do with a TOL?
That's a great question, focusing on the restrictions. Because while you get the right to occupy and use the land for that specific purpose, and yes, you can usually take action against trespassers, there are significant limits. Number one, you absolutely cannot sell it, transfer it, or sublet it. The license is personal to you or your organization. You also generally can't build permanent structures. Maybe temporary ones, if the license specifically allows it, but definitely not permanent buildings. You're also on the hook for all costs, utilities, maintenance, keeping the site safe. And critically, when the TOL expires or gets revoked, you have to clear the site, vacate, and return the land in its original condition, or as agreed. No compensation for any improvements you might have made. It's strictly temporary permission.
All right, now for the moment where these two topics collide. This is super important for the RES exam, everyone. We talked all about BSD, that property tax, but here's the kicker. A temporary occupation license, a TOL, is actually exempt from stamp duty. That's right, zero stamp duty on a TOL. Why? What's the logic here?
Okay, this is crucial. The reason comes down to that fundamental legal difference we touched on earlier. Stamp duty, under the law, is charged on documents that create or transfer an interest in property. Think about a lease agreement. A lease grants the tenant exclusive possession for a period that's considered an interest in the land. A TOL, however, is just a license. It's merely permission to occupy temporarily. It does not give the licensee exclusive possession or any proprietary rights or interest in the land itself. IRS is very clear on this. License agreements don't transfer an interest in property, so they aren't subject to stamp duty. It's not just a loophole, it's based on the very definition of what a TOL is legally. Understanding that license versus lease distinction is key.
That is such a clear explanation. It's not random. It's baked into the legal definition. License, not lease. No interest transferred, no stamp duty.
Got it. And finally, let's just quickly stamp out another common point of confusion, something that sounds similar but is totally different. TOL, temporary occupation license, is not the same as TOP, temporary occupation permit.
It's
Absolutely not. Please, please do not mix these up in the exam. They sound similar, but they're worlds apart. Let's break it down simply. TOL, as we've just discussed in detail, is about the temporary use of land. Issued by land agencies like SLA, HDB, JTC, it's about occupying land. TOP, temporary occupation permit, is completely different. That's issued by the Building and Construction Authority, BCA, for a newly completed building. It allows people to move into and occupy a new building before every single minor thing, like maybe final landscaping or some tiny fixes, is 100% complete. So TOL, temporary land use. TOP is early occupation of a new building. Totally different agencies, totally different purposes. Keep them separate.
perfect clarification. Okay, so let's recap. You've had the deep dive on buyer's stamp duty, the calculations, the higher of rule, the different ways it applies, even beyond simple sales. And you've got the lowdown on temporary occupation. Licenses, what they are, their temporary nature, common uses, the restrictions, and that absolutely crucial point, no stamp duty on TOLs. Plus, you've definitely nailed the difference between a TOL and a top U now. And remember, these aren't just abstract facts for an exam. These are real-world concepts you will use in your real estate career.
Absolutely. And thinking about TOLs specifically, it does spark an interesting thought, doesn't it? Given how temporary and flexible they are, and considering Singapore's constant evolution and need for efficient land use, what kind of future innovations in property or land management might we see? Could we see more models that rely on these kinds of flexible, non-proprietary arrangements, maybe enabled by new tech or changing needs? It's something interesting to ponder as you step into this dynamic industry.
Definitely food for thought. We really hope this deep dive is giving you clarity and a boost of of confidence for your upcoming RES exam. You put in the work, keep going, good luck, you've got this.